Sometimes the loneliest moment of your life is not when someone leaves you. It is when you begin leaving behind the version of yourself that everyone else expected. Nobody prepares you for this. People tell you that becoming yourself is liberating. They rarely tell you that it is also lonely, because every identity creates a certain kind of relationship. The people around you do not simply know your name, they know your patterns. They know your role, the friend who always listens, the child who never argues, the partner who always forgives, the employee who never says no, the person who keeps everyone comfortable for years. These roles become so familiar that people begin mistaking them for your personality. Perhaps you do too. Then something begins to change. Quietly, almost invisibly, you stop apologizing for existing. You begin speaking honestly. You say no without writing a paragraph explaining why. You stop chasing approval. You stop shrinking yourself so other people can feel taller. And something strange happens. The room becomes quieter. Some conversations disappear. Some friendships begin fading. Some family members suddenly insist, "You've changed." Maybe you have, or maybe, for the first time, you've stopped pretending. Carl Jung believed that the privilege of a lifetime is becoming who you truly are. But he also understood something that many people never hear. The road toward your authentic self is rarely crowded, because individuation, the process of becoming psychologically whole, is not a social achievement. It is an inward journey, and inward journeys often begin in solitude. By the end of this video, you will understand why loneliness is sometimes not the cost of losing people. It is the cost of finally refusing to lose yourself. The first silence, loneliness, is one of the most misunderstood emotions we experience. We usually imagine it as the absence of people, an empty apartment, a phone that never rings, a dinner table with one chair occupied instead of two. But there is another kind of loneliness, one that arrives while surrounded by friends, family, co-workers, even people who genuinely care about you. It is the loneliness of realizing they know the version of you that survived, not necessarily the version of you that exists. This realization rarely arrives dramatically. It appears in ordinary moments. You laugh at a joke that isn't funny. You agree with an opinion you don't believe. You hide excitement because someone else might think it's childish. You swallow disappointment because speaking honestly feels dangerous. Individually, these moments seem insignificant. Collectively, they become a life. The strange thing is that people often praise this adaptation. They call you mature, easygoing, reliable, professional, kind. Few ask what those qualities have cost, because every role has a price, and sometimes the price is authenticity. You become so practiced at meeting expectations that eventually you forget which expectations were actually yours. This is why the beginning of healing often feels confusing rather than exciting. You are no longer certain which desires belong to you and which belong to the person you learn to become. There is a period where certainty disappears. The old identity no longer fits. The new one has not yet formed. Psychologically, this is one of the most vulnerable places a human being can inhabit, not because you are lost, but because the map you have relied upon your entire life no longer leads where your soul wants to go. Carl Jung understood this state well. He believed that genuine transformation begins only when the old identity can no longer contain the person you are becoming. That moment feels less like growth and more like disorientation, because before you can discover who you are, you must first survive the experience of not knowing, and for a while, that uncertainty can feel incredibly lonely. It is as though you are standing between two worlds. One is familiar but false. The other is real but still invisible. Most people return to the familiar, not because it brings happiness, but because it offers certainty. The unknown asks for courage. The familiar only asks for repetition. Healing begins the moment you choose courage, even when nobody applauds, even when nobody understands, even when the only person walking beside you is yourself. That uncertainty can feel incredibly lonely. It is as though you are standing between two worlds. One is familiar but false, the other is real but still invisible. Most people return to the familiar, not because it brings happiness, but because it offers certainty. The unknown asks for courage. The familiar only asks for repetition. Healing begins the moment you choose courage, even when nobody applauds, even when nobody understands, even when the only person walking beside you is yourself, the people who preferred your mask. There is a difficult truth that almost everyone discovers during psychological growth. Not everyone who loved you loved the real you. Some loved your availability. Some loved your silence. Some loved how easily you could be controlled. Some loved how rarely you asked for anything in return. That does not necessarily make them bad people. Many never realized the role you were playing. They simply became accustomed to it. Imagine watching the same actor perform the same character for 20 years. Then one evening, the actor walks onto the stage as themselves. The audience becomes confused. Some even become angry. Not because authenticity is offensive, because it interrupts expectation. Human beings become attached to psychological predictability. Your growth introduces uncertainty, and uncertainty makes people uncomfortable. The friend who relied on your endless emotional labor may call you distant. The family member who expected obedience may call you rebellious. The partner who depended on your silence may call you difficult. The labels change, but the pattern remains. Your authenticity threatens identities that were built around your compliance. This is why growth often feels like abandonment, not because becoming yourself pushes everyone away, because it reveals who was connected to your essence and who was connected only to your performance. That realization hurts, not because it proves you are unlovable, because it forces you to grieve relationships that were never built on complete honesty in the first place. Sometimes the deepest grief is not losing another person, it is realizing they never truly met you, and perhaps you never gave them the opportunity. Why growth changes your relationships. There is an uncomfortable reality that very few people are willing to admit. When you change, you force everyone around you to confront the version of you they had grown comfortable with. Most people believe relationships are built upon love. Some are. Many are built upon predictability. You know exactly what to expect from one another. The responsible one, the funny one, the peacemaker, the caretaker, the successful one, the invisible one. Every family, every friendship, every workplace quietly assigns roles. Those roles create stability, but they also create prisons, because the moment someone stops performing, the entire system becomes unstable. Imagine an old mobile hanging above a child's bed. Every piece is carefully balanced. Touch one part, and everything begins moving. Human relationships often work the same way. One person's transformation changes everyone else's position. When you stop rescuing everyone, someone else must face their own problems. When you begin setting boundaries, others lose unlimited access to your energy. When you stop pretending to agree, people are forced to meet the real person standing before them. This is why authenticity sometimes feels disruptive. Not because truth is dangerous, but because truth rearranges every relationship built on illusion. Carl Jung once observed that people will do almost anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. Sometimes your growth silently invites other people to face theirs. Some accept that invitation. Others reject it, not because they hate you, because your transformation reminds them of transformations they have postponed inside themselves. Nothing unsettles us more than witnessing someone become what we secretly wish we had the courage to become. That is why authenticity often creates resistance. Not only admiration, solitude is not the enemy. Modern life teaches us something dangerous, that being alone means something is wrong. If you eat alone, people assume you're lonely. If you travel alone, they wonder who left you. If you spend weekends reading instead of socializing, they ask if you're okay, as though silence were evidence of failure. Jung saw solitude differently. He believed there comes a point where every person must temporarily withdraw from the noise of collective expectations, not forever. long enough to hear their own voice again, because the world is incredibly loud. Advertisements tell you who to become, social media tells you who to admire, family tells you who you should be, friends tell you what success looks like. Culture rewards conformity far more consistently than authenticity. Eventually, your own inner voice becomes almost impossible to hear, not because it disappeared, because it has been interrupted for years. Think of a lake. When the wind constantly disturbs the surface, you cannot see the bottom. Only when everything becomes still does clarity emerge. Solitude creates that stillness. It is not empty, it is spacious. There is an enormous difference. Loneliness says, I have nobody. Solitude says, I am finally meeting myself. At first, the difference feels almost impossible to recognize, because silence can be frightening. When external noise disappears, internal noise becomes louder. Old memories return. Old fears begin speaking. Questions you've avoided for years suddenly ask for your attention. Who am I trying to impress? Why am I exhausted all the time? Which parts of my personality actually belong to me? What if the life I've built isn't the life I truly want? These questions cannot be answered while constantly distracted. They require space, and space often feels lonely before it feels peaceful. Many people run from this stage. They immediately fill every quiet moment. Music, podcasts, scrolling, conversations, dating, work, anything to avoid hearing themselves think. But every distraction postpones the same meeting. Eventually, you must sit across from yourself. No audience, no performance, no applause, only honesty. It may become the most important conversation of your life. The death before the rebirth. Every meaningful transformation contains a hidden funeral. We celebrate beginnings, new careers, new relationships, new identities, but we rarely acknowledge what had to die first. Every authentic version of yourself requires the death of an inauthentic one. The people pleaser, the perfectionist, the invisible child, the constant rescuer, the person who measured worth through achievement. None of these identities disappear without resistance. Because they once protected you, your nervous system remembers that. It whispers, don't change, stay safe, keep everyone happy, become smaller. Those voices are not evidence that you're moving in the wrong direction. They are echoes from an earlier chapter of your life. Survival strategies often outlive the danger that created them. Imagine continuing to wear heavy winter clothing years after moving into a tropical climate. The coat once protected you, now it suffocates you. Many psychological defenses work exactly the same way. Healing is not hating the person you used to be. It is thanking them before gently letting them rest. Because they carried you through seasons you could not have survived otherwise, but they were never meant to carry you forever. One of the most compassionate things you can say to your younger self is this: you no longer have to protect me in that way. Those words sound simple. Sometimes they take years to believe. And yet, the moment you begin believing them, something inside finally exhales. Not because life has become easier, because the war inside you has begun ending. The person you were pretending to be no longer has to work every waking hour. For the first time, you begin experiencing the extraordinary relief of simply existing, not performing, not earning, not proving, simply existing. That is where individuation quietly begins. Not in achievement, not in applause, but in permission. Permission to become someone whose life no longer depends on hiding. The loneliness no one sees. There is a loneliness that almost nobody notices. Not because it is small, because it is invisible. It happens while you're sitting at dinner with people you've known for years. You smile, you laugh, you contribute to the conversation. Nothing appears wrong, yet somewhere beneath the surface, you feel strangely absent, as though your body arrived, but something essential stayed behind. This is one of the quiet consequences of living through a persona. The more successful the mask becomes, the less often your real self is invited into the room. People continue loving the version of you they have always known. Meanwhile, the person you are becoming quietly waits in silence, waiting for permission, waiting for safety, waiting to be introduced. The tragedy is that many people spend decades waiting, not because the world forbids authenticity, because somewhere they learned authenticity was dangerous. Perhaps they were told directly, perhaps they learned through experience. A parent withdrew affection, a teacher mocked curiosity, friends laughed at vulnerability. A partner punished honesty. The lesson became simple. Hide, and you will belong. Reveal yourself, and you may be left alone. The child accepts this lesson. The adult continues living by it, long after the danger has disappeared. That is why healing often feels less like learning and more like remembering. Remembering that you no longer live in the same emotional world. Remembering that you are no longer powerless. Remembering that the rules protecting your childhood may now be imprisoning your adulthood. The fear beneath every mask. Most people think they fear rejection. They don't. Rejection is painful. But beneath rejection, there is something even deeper. The fear that if people truly knew you, they would choose someone else. Think about that for a moment. Not, they won't like me, but they won't like the real me. That fear changes everything, because now every relationship becomes a performance review. You monitor every sentence, every opinion, every emotional reaction, every mistake. You become your own audience, judging yourself before anyone else has the chance. Eventually, you become exhausted, not because relationships are difficult, because acting is. Imagine spending your entire life improvising a character, never breaking role, never forgetting your lines, never allowing yourself to relax. Eventually, even happiness begins feeling artificial, not because happiness disappeared, because the person experiencing it doesn't feel entirely real. Many people describe this as emptiness, others call it burnout, some call it depression. Sometimes it is simply the exhaustion of carrying an identity that was never designed to be permanent. Jung believed that every mask eventually demands payment, not because masks are evil, because anything that separates you from yourself requires constant energy to maintain. The authentic self rests, the persona performs. One creates peace, the other creates fatigue. The longer you confuse the two, the heavier life becomes. Why your old life starts feeling smaller. There comes a moment, sometimes slowly, sometimes all at once, when the life that once satisfied you begins feeling strangely small, not objectively, internally. The conversations feel repetitive, the ambitions feel borrowed, the goals that once motivated you begin losing their emotional gravity. This often frightens people. They assume something is wrong. My job hasn't changed. My friends haven't changed. My city hasn't changed. So why does everything suddenly feel different? Because you changed. Growth rarely announces itself with excitement. It often arrives disguised as dissatisfaction. Not because your life is bad, because your soul has outgrown its container. Imagine planting an oak tree inside a small ceramic pot. For years, it fits perfectly. Then one day, the roots reach the edges. Nothing outside has changed. The pot is exactly the same. The tree is not. That is what psychological growth feels like. The environment that once protected you begins limiting you. The conversations that once inspired you feel repetitive. The roles that once gave you identity feel like costumes. This is the cost of returning. Returning to yourself is expensive, not financially, emotionally. You may lose certainty. You may lose approval. You may lose friendships that depended on your silence. You may lose identities that took decades to build. You may even lose the future you once imagined. That loss deserves grief, real grief, because even false identities contain real memories. The person you used to be was trying to survive. They deserve compassion, not shame. Too many people approach healing like a war. They try to destroy the old self. But Jung's psychology points somewhere gentler. Integration, not execution. You don't hate the frightened child. You embrace them. You don't punish the people pleaser. You understand why they appeared. You don't ridicule the perfectionist. You thank them for trying to keep you safe. Then, little by little, you stop asking them to lead your life. Healing is not replacing one identity with another. It is allowing every part of you to finally sit at the same table, not as enemies, as family. Because wholeness is not becoming someone different. Wholeness is becoming impossible to divide. And something extraordinary begins happening. The loneliness starts changing. At first, it felt like abandonment. Now, it begins feeling like peace, not because more people arrived, because you finally did. Coming home to yourself, there is a moment so quiet that many people almost miss it. Nothing dramatic happens, no applause, no revelation, no certainty. One morning, you simply wake up and notice that you no longer need everyone to understand you. That realization changes everything, not because other people suddenly approve, because their approval is no longer the foundation of your identity. For most of your life, you believed belonging required constant negotiation. Be easier, be quieter, be more successful, be less emotional, become whatever the room needs. Eventually, you realize something extraordinary. The room has been changing your entire life. Every environment wanted something different. One group admired confidence, another called it arrogance. One relationship praised your sensitivity, another called it weakness. One family celebrated sacrifice, another expected perfection. If your identity depends on everyone's expectations, then your identity will change with every room you enter. You become a mirror, reflecting whoever happens to be standing in front of you. Eventually, you stop knowing what belongs to them and what belongs to you. This is why authenticity feels so peaceful, not because life becomes easier, because your center stops moving. For the first time, you carry your home within you. The quiet strength of authenticity. Many people imagine authenticity as becoming louder, more confident, more expressive. Sometimes it looks exactly like that. More often, it becomes quieter. You no longer argue to prove your intelligence. You no longer explain yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. You no longer chase relationships that require constant performance. You stop trying to convince everyone that you deserve to exist, because somewhere along the journey, you realized existence was never something that needed to be earned. Think about how much energy you've spent trying to become acceptable, how many conversations you replayed in your mind, how many opinions you swallowed, how many dreams you quietly abandoned because they might disappoint someone else. Imagine reclaiming all of that energy. Imagine waking each morning without asking, "What will make people like me today?" Instead, asking, "What feels true today?" The second question changes your life, because truth has a different rhythm than approval. Approval is immediate, truth is patient. Approval feels exciting, truth feels peaceful. Approval is loud, truth whispers. For years, you may mistake the whisper for weakness, until one day you realize it has been guiding you all along. Why the journey never ends. Many people think individuation has a finish line, as though one day you simply become yourself and the work is complete. Jung never described it that way. He saw it as a lifelong conversation, because every season of life introduces a new version of you. The person you become at 20 cannot solve the questions waiting at 40. The wisdom that serves you today may limit you tomorrow. Growth continues, not because you are incomplete, because life continues revealing deeper layers of your own humanity. The self is not a destination, it is a relationship. And like every meaningful relationship, It requires attention, curiosity, honesty, compassion. There will still be moments when you wear the mask. Of course there will. The goal was never to destroy the persona. The world still requires roles. You will still become the professional, the friend, the parent, the partner, the teacher, the student. The difference is this: you will remember they are roles, not your identity. You can wear the mask without forgetting the face beneath it. That is freedom. One final story. Imagine walking through an ancient forest. You have wandered for years, sometimes following the crowd, sometimes following fear, sometimes following voices that were never yours. The path has been confusing. You became lost more than once. At times, you doubted there was even a destination. Then eventually, the trees begin opening. Ahead, you see a small house. Nothing extraordinary. No palace, no monument. Just a quiet home, with warm light glowing through the windows. As you walk closer, you realize something impossible. You have been here before, long ago, before the masks, before the expectations, before you learn that love had conditions. You open the door. Inside, there is no audience, no judgment, no performance, only peace. You were never searching for a new place. You were searching for the place you left. That place was yourself. Perhaps that is what healing truly is. Not becoming someone extraordinary, not becoming fearless, not becoming perfect, simply finding your way back to the person you abandoned while trying to become someone everyone else could love. Carl Jung once wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." Most people read that sentence as though it were an achievement, but perhaps it is an invitation to stop measuring your worth by applause, to stop confusing acceptance with love, to stop asking strangers questions that only your own soul can answer, because the greatest loneliness was never being physically alone. It was spending years disconnected from yourself, and the greatest companionship is discovering that beneath every fear, every role, every performance, there has always been someone waiting patiently. Not a better version of you, not a more successful version, not a more admired version, simply you. Maybe that is why becoming yourself feels so lonely at first, because very few people can walk that road with you. But if you keep walking, something beautiful happens. The loneliness slowly changes its name. It becomes stillness, then clarity, then freedom, and eventually it becomes home. If this video stayed with you, don't rush to the next one. Sit with one question, not the question the world has been asking you, the question you've been avoiding. If no one expected anything from you, who would you quietly become? You don't have to answer today. Just promise yourself that one day you will.